Hello, welcome back. The List Lab, episode 4. So, the top 5 endless spells in Age of Sigmar. We're going to kick off a bit of a series here. I think nominally every fortnight we'll try and do a top 5 and look at a range of different things across the Age of Sigmar landscape, not necessarily limited to lists specifically. And we're going to start this series with the top 5 endless spells. Let's get to it. Endless spells, the basics. Alright, so during Age of Sigmar 1, poor peasant wizards could only cast normal spells. They could cast the spells on their war scroll, and in some cases that they would have faction-specific spells that they also had access to. Now, as the game of Sigmar has sort of progressed, so too has the narrative. And during the Age of Sigmar, Nagash, the Lord of Death, built this huge inverted pyramid in Shaish, the realm of death, and there was this event. The Sigmar scholars amongst us know it as the Arcanum Optima, but you might have heard of it as the Necroquake. And basically, what happens is there's the disruption, the fabric of time and space. They've got some like Back to the Future style chaos theory stuff going on, and once that's all finished, of course, the good guys prevail via Teclis and his light tower, shooting a big beam across Hysh, and the Skaven, led by Cricktail from Clan Slink, sneaking in and disrupting Nagash's plans. Once that's all resolved, wizards in the mortal realms all of a sudden can cast spells which take on a life of their own, these endless spells. So today's episode, we're going to have a chat about those. Alright, so first of all, you include an endless spell in your list. So unlike the spell on a war scroll, an endless spell is pointed and you pay for it out of the points allocated to your list. In matched play, you can take a maximum of 3 endless spells in your list, and you can't take any duplicates. So for instance, you wouldn't be able to take 2 Balewind Vortexes. Endless spells are cast in the same manner as other spells. A wizard simply rolls 2 dice and adds any modifiers. That's really important because there's a number of ways that you can get modifiers to casting across Age of Sigmar. Some of those come innately, like for instance Nagash has +3 to cast as a starting point. That degrades over the game sometimes. And then other things like Arcane Terrain are going to give you +1 to cast. So there's ways that we can buff up our casting rolls. There's then unbinding, and the language here starts to become important. So the wizard casts the spell. An opposing wizard or model that's able to unbind can attempt to unbind if they are within 30 inches. If they're within 30 inches of that casting wizard. And then, because these spells remain in play once they've been cast, when it's your turn, at the start of your hero phase, you're able to dispel an endless spell. So a wizard can forego casting a spell and instead can choose to dispel one of the endless spells that are on the board. And the reason that I raised the casting values as a starting point is that the casting increases, casting buffs are pretty prevalent. They're pretty common. Unbinding bonuses are less common, and then dispelling bonuses are less common again. So it's increasingly difficult to sort of get the spell off the board once it's there. And the other thing that's important to note about dispelling is you need to be within 30 inches of where the endless spell is. So with predatory endless spells that are moving around, and with spells being cast not in the immediate vicinity of the wizard, you might have dispel attempts when you didn't previously have unbind attempts because you're out of range. I did just mention predatory. There's basically 2 types. You've got these stationary endless spells, and then you've got predatory endless spells. So a predatory endless spell moves in between battle rounds, and that introduces a really interesting element for determining the sequence of the turn, because the way that it works is you roll off to see who's going to go first in the battle round, and then the player who's going second in the battle round, they are the first person that's able to move a predatory spell. So in some cases, and notably it's things like the Geminids, the endless spell is so strong that it becomes a determining factor of whether you go first or second. You think, if I go first, I'm going to be hit by these Geminids. They're going to significantly debuff a huge portion of my army. Therefore, on that basis, I'm giving away the turn. So it's a really interesting sort of mini game. And then the number of endless spells becomes relevant as well because you alternate. So whenever there's an odd number of endless spells, the player going second is getting a benefit there in terms of being able to move a greater number than their opponent. So the basics, like you buy them, you add them to your list, you cast them with a wizard. Your opponent can unbind them, or alternately, you can dispel endless spells. Just important to note there, it's the start of the hero phase, so you'll often have people forgetting to dispel and then wanting to go back. That's really problematic. If you make a mistake in Age of Sigmar, just move on. Don't ask your opponent for takebacks. Don't put them in that position. All right. Let's pretend we're clever and dive into a little bit more detail here. So there are the standard endless spells that every army has access to, and then some armies have these sort of faction modifications. So notably, the cities of Sigmar, all of their endless spells are what's called empowered. So a war scroll for an endless spell will have a series of rules. It'll have a series of information, and that'll be things like this endless spell, can move X number of inches. It'll then go on to say, if your battle is being fought in the realm of, and we'll just use Shaish as an example because there's a fair few there, then the range is changed. So a thing like the Umbral Spell Portal typically has a short range, 18 inches. However, in the realm of death, its range is board wide. So if you're able to get a model like Nagash into the realm of death, or if you're able to get Doomfire Warlocks into the realm of death and utilize the spell portal, all of a sudden its reach is board wide, and that's really significant. Well, the cities of Sigmar, all of theirs count as empowered, so that's a really, really strong faction ability, and one that's not pointed into that army in any way, so that they get a massive buff for free. Seraphon have access to what are called bound endless spells. So we spoke earlier about the predatory endless spells and the way that movement of predatory endless spells is alternating between players. A bound endless spell can only be moved by the player who cast it. So it makes some spells, which typically might be considered risky, like the Purple Sun, because it could come back and hit your own army, it makes those spells significantly safer, and ultimately it makes them significantly better. The bound spell mechanic is, in my opinion, the strongest faction ability in the whole of Age of Sigmar at the moment. And then the third army that has these faction mods, it's slightly different, but the Ossiarch Bone Reapers. So their spells are called Soul Linked, and what happens with those is that they're moved outside of the sequencing for other predatory spells. So basically the Soul Link spell can only be moved by the Ossiarch Bone Reaper wizard, which similarly to the Seraphon, provides them, with greater flexibility and reliability, but dissimilarly to the Seraphon, they don't have access to the whole gamut of spells that are available through the Malign Sorcery. The next thing to note is that, how do we determine value? Like, we're going to talk about top fives today, and for me, it's really interesting. I've been trying to get a sense of how these top 5 videos run on YouTube, and I've watched a few of them, and it seems like there's not really any uniformity to how people do this. But for me, I'm thinking about value in the sense of how does it add value to your army. So I think the best way to do that is to determine the impact of the spell and then divide that by the cost. Like, cost is a fixed rate. Like, the cost doesn't change. Geminids are 60 points. Regardless of whether you're Legions of Nagash or Slaves to Darkness, right? That's a fixed cost, and then the impact is variable, and the impact is going to vary depending on a number of factors. So, how effective are they in the given matchup? So the value is going to vary from one game to the next, and also how sort of reliable are they? How difficult are they to remove? There's a whole host of things that will change, and the impact of that change is disproportional. So if the Purple Sun, for instance, it used to be 100 points, it dropped down to 50 points. Well, what that actually did, we're doing maths now apparently, because it's a denominator, because we're dividing by that, it's doubling the value. Whereas a small change, like for instance those bound endless spells I was mentioning earlier, they're typically only 10 points more expensive. However, the impact that they have is significantly larger. So, just in terms of determining value, we're looking really at what's the impact they're having and how much is it costing us to derive that impact. Next thing I want to talk about was just that there are some opportunities for auto casting. So typically, you'll see things like the spell in the bottle, which is something that an Aether Chemist in Caradron Overlords can do, and you can't stop that. They pick an endless spell as part of their army, they pay for it, they use it, there's no way to stop it, and that also has excellent utility because it's not faction locked, so it gives them access to things that otherwise aren't possible within a KO army. And then I guess the other auto casts of note are the blue scribes. Simply roll the dice on a 2+, they auto cast the spell, which is amazing. And then to a lesser extent, things like Techless, where they're automatically casting a spell on a 10, similar but different. The auto casting the endless spells is really significant as well, because some of them have deliberately difficult casting values, like an 8+, for instance, and being able to do that automatically provides your army with a level of security that doesn't exist elsewhere. There are some auto dispels as well to be aware of. So notably the Lord of Change, Kairos, and Archaon, all from Tzeentch, have an 18-inch auto dispel that they can use in their turn. And then Techless has a 30-inch auto dispel, which is incredibly strong. Techless has all the tech. The other things that auto dispel, obviously, if the endless spell, the predatory endless spell, hits the board edge, it's dispelled. So sometimes when it's your turn to choose, there's a question of can I gun this towards the board edge and just run it off the board edge in between the turns, because as the active player, maybe I want to cast it again and I don't want to waste one of my because remember I said you have to trade off a cast for a dispel. I don't want to waste one of my casts, or maybe you're thinking, I can't afford for this particular endless spell to be in my backfield. So rather than do damage to my opponent, I'm just going to move this one to create a level of safety and security. And then the other one is nullification terrain. So if you set up within or finish a move within 1 inch of nullification terrain, then the spell is an endless spell is automatically dispelled. Where that becomes most relevant, I think, is for games played in the Realm of Death, because in the Realm of Death, all terrain is nullification. So that can be really good protection. If you get to choose realms, for instance, that can be really good protection for matchups like that, like probably the Tzeentch matchup and the Seraphon matchup, where they can generate quite a lot of damage and threat from their endless spells. All right, let's just get into the top 5. Lorshon the Solseeker. Now, I love this guy. Ostensibly what he does is teleports a unit 12 inches. So all of them need to be within 3. It means if you set up the models behind Lorshon and then you put them in front, you're effectively getting about a 17 or 18 inch teleport, and they have to end their move outside of 9 of opposing models, and 1 model dies when you do this. So he slays someone as he takes them over. He costs 60 points. So there is another endless spell which provides a teleport, the Soulscream Bridge. Soulscream Bridge is 100 points. So it's 40 points cheaper is quite considerable. And the other thing about him, as opposed to the Soulscream Bridge, is when the movement occurs. So Lorshon does his movement during the hero phase, and that's really significant because there are a number of armies that are able to return slain models in the hero phase. So a great example of this would be teleporting 40 Mortek Guard. You would do it during the hero phase. Mortek Guard is sort of known for being a pretty slow unit, but incredibly durable and incredibly hitty in the right sub-factions. Lorshon would teleport them forward. He would slay one, perhaps through something like Damn Terrain. You might have slayed some other Mortek Guard, and then a unit like the Soul Mason just automatically brings back 3. So what that means in real terms is you've started 9 inches away, because you've completed your teleport. You've then brought back 3 models on 25 mil bases with 1 inch space between them. That gives you approximately another 6 inches. Their War Scroll has +1 to charge, gives you a 7th inch. You then roll 2 dice for charges. So they auto make that 9 inch charge. The same can be done in Cities of Sigmar with the I like to do it personally with the executioners, because the sorceress will stab an executioner to get +2 to cast. Another sorceress will stab an executioner to get +2 to cast. You can then set up Launching, but you only need a 4+ because you're +2 to cast. You can then cast Life Swarm. So 3 executioners will have died. They've also got +1 to charge, and they've got 30 wounds on a 4-up save doing mortals that auto make their charge. Brilliant. Really, really strong. Some really cool tech you can do with this guy. I think the other thing about him is that it's for models wholly within 3, and that's deceptive, because people think that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the same flexibility as you would out of the Soulscream bridge. However, it's 54 25mm models, and it's 32 30 2mm models. So that means a unit of 30 Grimghast Reapers, using our earlier example of Death, who do have access, even in Nighthaunt, who do have access to bringing back models in the hero phase. That's ridiculous. 30 Grimghast Reapers, who are going to find themselves, because they're on 32mm bases, who are also going to find themselves needing like a double 1 to make a 9-inch charge. It's just awesome. So that interaction with returning models, I think, is fantastic. One thing, like a little tidbit here for you, you might notice that this model doesn't look anything like Age of Sigmar, and in particular, if you look at the staff and the head of the boat, that's because this guy was actually called Tomb Baroque of Usheron, and he was going to be a splash release during the end times for the Tomb King's army. That release never eventuated, and instead he sat on the shelf for a few years at GW and has now been brought out. So that's a little bit of, lifting the veil for you. I won't name sources. And the other thing I love to do with Launchon, it's probably easiest just to show this with a graphic. So the other thing I like to do with him, and this is again a Cities of Sigmar example, but it ports over to other armies. So let's pretend, I'll go red here. Over here is in our turn. We're number 1, right? We're in this big bubble, and we've got 30 Iron Drakes. We teleport them all the way up here. And then they're up here to shoot in our turn. Sat behind that Iron Drake unit is a big screen, and that's 20 Longbeards we've got sat behind them there, right? The Longbeards are having a dual purpose. They're giving us, reroll 1s to wound as their War Scroll ability for friendly dwarfs. So they're giving us reroll 1s to wound. But this example, obviously, is you've gone second in the turn. The other thing they're doing is they're providing us with a screen, because our opponent's going to get the turn back. And then when it's our turn to move the predatory spell, we're going to move this guy back here where he started. And we're going to have 3+... doing this with my opposite hand, hence the awful writing. We're going to have 3+ inches there in between the very back of the Longbeard's base and our Iron Drake's base. So effectively what we've done is we've been able to throw our Iron Drakes over. We've been able to shoot 60 shots because they haven't moved. They've just had a setup. We've been able to shoot 60 shots with our Iron Drakes minus the 2 for the guy that died. And then our opponent's got the turn back, but our screen is already set up, and we jump back over. Now, for illustrative purposes, I've got the screen in a straight line here, but that could be zigzagged around. So that might be, contesting objectives as well. Its sole purpose is not to screen, but it's providing us with utility. Had we got the turn, right? Had we got the turn, and our opponent were to move the Solseeker, you can only take your own friendly models with it, so they wouldn't have been able to sort of ship our guys away, and then we'd be in a strong position, obviously, with 12, or in Cities of Sigmar's case, 18 inches up the board. So that, to me, is a piece of really good tech that is transferable to other armies as well. If you have a shooting unit, or if you have a large unit that you want to contest an objective in your turn, but then subsequently want to protect in your opponent's turn, he's a really great piece for doing that. It's something you can't do with the Soulscream bridge. All right. Next up is the Darkfire Demon Rift. This one is one of those cases of does exactly what it says on the tin. Like, there's no secret tech here. What you're doing is you are stacking the number of wizards on the board, and you are stacking the number of endless spells on the board so that you can maximize the damage that he pushes out. This is from the Slaves to Darkness faction. You set it up wholly within 9 of the caster. It moves 12, so 23 inches. And then any units it's passed across or within 1 take D3 mortal wounds. Now, D3 mortal wounds is pretty typical for an endless spell. That's not particularly impressive. Where this one sort of comes into its own +1 mortal wound for each wizard or endless spell within 12 of where it finishes. Now, you can build your list around this, and it's not uncommon for Tzeentch or Slaves to Darkness players to build their list around this, and you can create situations where it is D3 plus 12 mortal wounds hitting 5 enemy units. Like, that is wild. That's 75 mortal wounds that it's pumping out, which is just obviously game-changing. And if you think about it, the matchup with Lumineth, if the Lumineth army doesn't have Teclis, or if Teclis has had to use his auto dispel on something else, this becomes terrifying. Both Tzeentch and Slaves to Darkness have ways to really significantly increase the casting and ways to significantly increase where this is on the board, even from turn 1. So Despoilers, Host Arcanum, they both get pre-game moves from models that are eligible to cast this. So that's going to be right in your grill. With the Despoilers, you can take a Tzeentch Despoilers list, right? And the Demon Prince of Tzeentch for Slaaneish's command ability is +1 to cast. And there's an artifact there where you get plus D3 command points at the start of the game. You start with a CP, maybe you board a CP, turn 1 you get a CP. You could be on like +6 to cast with a Tzeentch wizard casting this in Slaves to Darkness. Turn 1 when you're already 6 inches up the board, that's unreal. So this thing, it's not particularly sneaky, it's not particularly clever, but it is very, very strong, almost oppressively so. Alright, the Chalice of Usheron. So this one here is from the Flesh Eater Courts. Again, it's only cast on a 6, so relatively easy to cast, and it's set up within 24 of the caster. So what you're looking to do here is to get this pretty central to where you think the combats are going to occur in the game. And then what you do is you keep track of all the slain models, and at the end of each turn, roll a number of dice equal to those slain models. So say, for instance, that there's been 30, 40 models slain, not uncommon with a couple of Terrorgeist roaming around the battlefield. You'd roll 30 or 40 dice. On each 4+, you're healing a wound or returning a single wound model. So where I saw this used really, really, really effectively was on the final game of Lord of War. So we were streaming Lord of War for the Dwellers. Top table, final game, Jesse Perkins is playing. And I think it's Knife to the Heart, and he sets this up. He gets a unit of pretty depleted. Crypt Ghouls, wholly within 12, kills a heap of stuff, and then he snakes his unit with the 4+ to bring them back all the way to the objective, and he's able to claim both objectives in Knife to the Heart. There's a whole heap of sneaky tech things you can do, and then just the obvious, small brain play. Just keep your Terrorgeist at its top bracket. If that army is oriented around a Terrorgeist that fights twice, you want to do everything in your power to preserve your command points, so you're not wasting command points getting it up to the top bracket, and everything in your power to ensure that you're maximizing its damage output and its speed. So by keeping those big monsters alive, the value that you're getting, this is that question of value, right, is really significant. All right, the Scuttle Tide. Now this spell might come as a bit of a surprise to players that aren't Gloomspike Kids players. Like, cast on a 7+, so that's pretty high. Cast on a 7+, set it up wholly within 6 of a terrain feature anywhere on the board. That is enormous. Like, typically Age of Sigmar games will have 10, 11, 12 pieces of terrain. This can go anywhere on the board so long as it's wholly within 6. And you know who likes to hide in terrain? Little 5-wound characters, and that's exactly who you want to be chasing around with this Scuttle Tide. So it's got a 6-inch move, and after it's set up or has completed a move, any units within 1 inch, or alternatively, any units that finish a move, including charges, within 6, roll 6 dice, with each 5+ causing mortal wounds. What that means, this thing is able to cause havoc. It sets up in your opponent's backfield. If they start moving near it, they take mortal wounds. As a starting point, you choose their little heroes to take mortal wounds. The thing is massive. What you're looking to do is to block them up. Like, the width of this thing means that it can legitimately delay the opponent for a turn, 2 turns, and that can have a really significant impact on the game. And yeah, finally, this should have been obvious. The writing should have been on the wall. Geminids, that this spell has for some time been the strongest spell, the strongest endless spell rather in Age of Sigmar. So firstly, let's talk about the range. Must be set up wholly within 18 inches. That's massive for an endless spell of the caster. So 18 inches. It then makes an 8-inch move. So 26 inches. There's 2 of these, and they have to end their moves within 6 of each other. But you can do little things where you sort of dart out one way and come back, and then dart out another way and come back. You're a thing that flies. You just move around over the top of stuff. All units passed across suffer D3 mortal wounds, which is really good because of the range and because of the fact that there are 2 of them, and you're able to swing them around and get characters at the back and hit units. Then there's a secondary effect. It's either -1 to hit, which is for all attacks including shooting, or it's -1 attack, which is for melee weapons only. So that's incredible, and it's for armies that are built around a Death Star. It is game-changingly strong. So when you're designing a list and there's a central element, let's just say for instance 20 hex raids, you want to do everything in your power to generate additional attacks, to generate additional hits, to proc mortal wounds if that's a thing you can do. If you're hit with the Geminids and it's -1 to hit, and all of a sudden your hex rates, which you're hitting on 4s, have dropped to 5s, you've just lost a third of your output. That's really, 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 really significant. Alternatively, there's a heap of units that are paying to get a second attack. It's costed into their war scroll that there are a 2 attack unit, and that's that's the thing they've got going for them. So a unit like Hearthguard Berserkers has quite a number of things going for it, but one of its strengths is the number of attacks that it's doing. If you hit it with the -1 attack Geminid, all of a sudden you've halved its damage output. That's wild. Like it cannot be overstated. This is the strongest spell in the game, the strongest endless spell in the game, and it has been for some time. And the points cost of 60 points is actually farcical. Like, this thing, if it was 100 points, would still see top table competitive play. So if you're writing a list and your intent is to do as well as you can at a tournament, and you're intending on fighting some combats, then I would suggest having this probably as a starting point more often than not. I don't want to talk about bound Geminids. I've got too much post-traumatic stress disorder over the bound Geminids. Those things are wild. So for me, this is the clear head and shoulders number 1. The other 4, it's contestable. There are literally like 50 endless spells now, and a significant number of them consistently see play. That they're really good. I'd say like the only faction that has bad endless spells is Nighthaunt, and I don't know why, but they've got literally like the worst models in addition to the worst rules for their endless spells, which is really sad. Like, as a Nighthaunt player, I can't wait for a new book to drop where all of those endless spells cop a complete rewrite. So that's it for today. That's our first top 5 done. The intent of doing the top 5 was that it was going to be short and sweet. So I thought this would just be a 10-minute video, but we've gone and hit 28 minutes again. So I need to get a little bit of practice on being a bit more concise with these, because the idea was like a minute or 2 on each of them and then we'll be done. But that's right, we're done for today. Just quickly give some shout outs. So the Battle for the Digital Realms was a tournament held on TTS last weekend. Last weekend was the final day. I think it was held over a couple of weeks, and rounds 4 and 5 in particular, I mean the whole final day was great, but rounds 4 and 5 on the Honest Wargame, I would strongly encourage you to go and check out. Stuart running a Ogre Moor Tribes army, which took advantage of the Icefall Yeti special rules, being able to pile in 6 inches, being -1 to hit, being able to fight at the start of combat in Winterbite. Really, really clever, nuanced army, played really well. So that was a combination of 2 of my favourite things in Warhammer. Big brain list, big brain play. So definitely check that one out. And then the other one I've been watching recently, had these ones on while I've been doing some hobby, is the Wargamer Online. So there's a Nighthaunt versus More Tribes battle report, which I'd encourage you to watch. The Nighthaunt list has something like 20 units of chain ghasts, and the damage that they're able to do is incredible. I think in Australia they're 70 points for 2 models. I think there's $71 for 2 models. So anyone that wants to run 20 plus units of them over here, I'd sort of tip my hat to, and that they play a More Tribes army. And then the other game is Caradron Overlords versus Living City, and I love the Living City special rule where units are able to deploy off the board and able to move after they've shot if they're outside of 9 of opponents. The coupling of those two things makes for some incredibly interesting in-game sort of plays and decisions, and that's a really good one to watch as well. So if you're looking for any high-level games, I'd recommend all 4 of those. The other thing I wanted to do, just because it is my first top 5, I thought I would just give another top 5. This one hopefully is a little less hotly debated than the Endless Spells, but top 5 Nick Cage films. So Into the Spider-Verse, like, uncontestable, number 1, amazing movie. Face Off, what a farcical idea, love it. National Treasure, an even crazier idea. If possible, Con Air is the craziest idea for any Nick Cage film. Why would they transport the criminals? Like, why would they do that? It's just ridiculous. And then The Rock is equally ridiculous. I think Sean Connery's about 102, and he's doing, like, I don't know if anyone played the Zelda games where you have to get past guards. Like, he's doing the tricks from a Nintendo 64 game, so that's great. That's me for this week. I'll be back next week doing an actual list review show, so looking forward to that, and hopefully see you then.